season, and glad you're taking some time out of your day to join us. And we'll get on with our session in class. Just a reminder, welcome. This is Neighboring 101. This is where we talk about and talk with leaders in the neighboring movement nationwide, and we discover ways for organizations and individuals to use this idea of neighboring to put togetherness and to put community development and personal development back into their lives for the benefit of their community and themselves. So thank you for joining us. That was a lot of words there to begin with today. Hey, just a couple of announcements, or one actually this time. I've had some questions about this. Neighboring 101 does continue in 2022. If you've already enrolled in the class and are part of this, you don't have to do anything else. You'll automatically roll over to that, but we'll continue to have guests and authors and different speakers in every month in 2022. In the months of March and September, those classes will not be on the third Thursday at noon. They'll be at different times, those announcements will be coming later. But this Neighboring 101 will continue, and you'll continue to get reminder emails and things about those classes as well. And so you can attend live, the ones you want to, or watch the recordings afterwards. But just letting you know, that does continue in 2022. And if you have friends that want to enroll, they can go ahead and register at any time and be part of this ever-growing group. I think we're up to about 470 people now that get the reminder emails and are participating in one way or another. And so this month, a little advice from my neighborhood before we jump to our guest. I got some advice last month from Amy Lively. Amy wrote a book called How to Love Your Neighbor Without Being Weird. And I read it just because of the title, actually. But she posted a blog post a few days ago based on some conversations that she and I had a couple of months ago, giving ideas of five fun ways you could love your neighbors during this Christmas or holiday season. And I want to just share those with you briefly. We've tried these in our household, in our neighborhood. Number one, just invite a neighbor over for dessert. It can be a store-bought pie, an instant cocoa, and it can still be a fun time. I can attest to that. But just start with inviting one neighbor. How about delivering a Christmas card in person? I was surprised to discover how many of my neighbors, especially older ones, don't receive a single Christmas card. And delivering it in person opened a door for additional conversation. So it's an easy thing to do if you're trying to get acquainted with some neighbors. Make Christmas bright is what we call this one. If there's a prominent tree or something in your neighborhood, send out some invites, get neighbors together to decorate it together and light it up. You saw that in that video that we had leading up to this. We actually did this in our neighborhood this year, and we didn't have enough decorations and lights for all the people that showed up to do something. So we may have to find 2 trees next year, but it was a lot of fun. And it's something that can be done with a minimal investment. Everybody brings some of their own ornaments and decorations. Fun time. Help a neighbor in need. This is a great time to, maybe it's still raking leaves or helping with something else around somebody's home. Helping them out can be a great way to celebrate the holidays. Or host a favorite things party. My wife did this with 5 of our neighbors. You bring 5 of your favorite things and share those with the other neighbors. And so every neighbor leaves with 5 gifts that way. And in the process, you learn something about each of their neighbors. One of the neighbors brought over a flower arrangement that she made. She loves to arrange flowers. We didn't know that. And she did a wonderful job. So everybody leaves with these individual gifts that's a favorite thing of someone, and they learn something about their neighbor in the process. So that's my advice from the neighborhood. 5 ways here at the holidays to love on and get to know your neighbors. Let's see, any questions? Okay, nothing. Chat is open, of course, if you want to leave comments or ask questions. And then with our speaker today, I'm sure Mike is willing to take questions along as we go if you want to unmute and ask a question. So let's get right into it with him. Pastor Mike Mather is the author of Having Nothing, Possessing Everything. His book is the story of how one church found abundance in a community of material poverty. If you had a chance to read it, it's probably one of those books you would read more than once. It's a fascinating read. And this is also a fascinating introduction to asset-based community development for many of you. When Mike wrote the book, he was the pastor at Broadway United Methodist Church, located in an urban, low-income neighborhood of Indianapolis. He now serves as senior pastor at First United Methodist Church in Boulder, Colorado. I think it's a fairly new position for him. And I also understand that he recently had a chance to visit with Dave Runyon, who's the author of The Art of Neighboring. Mike is also a member of the faculty of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute at DePaul University. So you could say he's a real expert in this subject. So please help me welcome Pastor Mike Mather. Let's see, I see Mike on here somewhere. Yeah, Mike, I can even give you co-host responsibilities in case you need it or have anything to share.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Sounds like you're.
What's that?
I said, yeah, it sounds like your microphone's working. You've caught on to all this Zoom stuff in the new era, haven't we?
Everybody's been stuck with that. Yes. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be with you all. Please, as Dave did say, please put in questions or wave your hand or anything along the way. I'll tell you a little bit about my story and a little bit about asset-based community development, which I assume some of you know something about already. So when I first started as pastor in 1986 at Broadway Church in Indianapolis, it was a low-income, low-wealth neighborhood, and I came to run the neighborhood programs because I was going to make things better. And when I got there, I got there in the summer, and the summer program was basketball for the boys and cheerleading for the girls. And very painfully, we changed it. We don't have time for the story here, but just to say again, very painfully, we changed it. We built each week around one of the principles of Kwanzaa. We started every day with devotions. We ended every day with devotions. We had art, drama, recreation, history, math, Bible study, poetry, violin lessons, everything you could imagine. 250 young people, 9 to 5 every day. Broke my arm patting myself on the back. I felt so good about what we were doing. And the funders loved us. The people of the church were happy about it. People in the neighborhood seemed happy about it. But the last 9 months I was there in 1991, I did 9 funerals for young men under 25 years old in the 4-block radius around the church. Many of them young people who'd grown up going to the programming of the church, and it kicked the crap out of me. Here I was thinking I'm doing all this good work, and yet all these young people are dying in 4 blocks. And people would say to me, oh yeah, but if you hadn't have been doing this, it would have been worse. And I said 2 things to that. One is you're wrong. And the second is, even if you're right, this isn't good enough. And I didn't know what to do with all of that, right? So I moved to South Bend, Indiana, to a low-income, low-wealth neighborhood there. And I'm serving this little church that has 40 people, and it has a food pantry. And when people come to the food pantry, we had this form for people that we had to ask people because we got government surplus stuff. And it said, how much is your income and how much are your expenses? So people would say, well, my income's $600 a month and my expenses are $1,200 a month. Well, there wasn't a lot we could do with that. We just kind of put that in a file cabinet and put it away. Well, we came to Pentecost in May of 1992. And this woman after church, we're standing around talking. She says, you said that Peter, reading from the book of the prophet Joel, says that God's spirit flows down on all people, young and old, women and men. And I'm thinking, how good am I? It's a half an hour later, and she remembers what I said. I'm an awesome preacher. And I'm like, that's right. And she says, so how come you don't treat people like that? And I said, what do you mean? She said, when people come to the food pantry, you ask people how poor they are. If you believe God's Spirit flowed down on all people, young and old, women and men, how come you aren't asking them that? Well, it's a really good question. So this was my first real encounter with asset-based community development. That was on Sunday. On Monday, when people came to the food pantry, we started asking people 10 pages of questions about what they were good at. And I'm not talking about spiritual gift surveys that churches do. I mean, like, have you taken care of older folks? Have you taken care of children because they're members of your family? Because you've had a job somewhere? Can you fix a toaster? Can you drive a car? Have you helped a neighbor out? Do you play a musical instrument? Have you cooked for more than 10 people? Have you cleaned up after more than 10 people? Do you fish? I mean, just everything, 10 pages of questions of that. And the last 3 questions we asked were, what 3 things do you do well enough you could teach somebody else how to do it? Because everybody has a gift. The second is, what would you like to learn that you don't already know? And the third is, who else is going with you along the way? Well, one of the first people who came to us was this little woman, about 5 feet tall, lived half a block from the church, named Adele Almagier. And she told us she was a good cook. And we said, prove it. And she said, what do you mean? Well, cook for the custodian, secretary, and pastor lunch on Friday. So she cooked for us. It was great. And we paid her for it. So leadership of the neighborhood organization was meeting. We said, don't meet somewhere else. Meet here at the church and let Adele cook for you. So she cooked for them. They loved it. Over the next 9 months, they connected her with the Studebaker Elementary, had a PTO meeting. They needed food. She provided it. Southeast Side Neighborhood Health Center had an open house. They needed food. She provided it. Memorial Hospital had a press conference in our neighborhood. They needed food. She provided it. So then the Chamber of Commerce calls. Hey, we want to have a meeting of our leadership program in your church building. Well, you can do that. Since we're going to be there all day, we need to use your kitchen. We said, we would prefer you use our caterer. They said, okay, we took $20 and bought her 1,000 business cards. They said, La Chaparrita Catering, spunky Tex-Mex food. And she fed 70 of the business and civic leaders in the community. Through that, she got connected to the Michiana Businesswomen's Association. And a year and a half later, she opened up Adelita's Fajitas at the corner of 8th and Harrison in Elkhart. Now, if we had asked her when she showed up, tell us how poor you are, we'd have all ended up poor for it, and we would have missed a lot of great food. And all of a sudden, I'm like, why haven't I been doing this? This is what I believe in. I didn't have to change anything about the way I thought I believed. Why? And I realize it's because all our practices are based on scarcity. You know, what's missing here, not what's present here. And you can't do anything with what's missing. You can only do so. And this is true for every one of us who are, I'm listening to this right now. I mean, all of us are where we are because there's people who, despite a lot of dumb things we've done in our life, you know, thought there was something we could contribute to. And if we were only defined by the things that were wrong with us, that would be miserable. And that's exactly how I had been treating people. Tell me what your needs are. I never said, tell me what gifts you have. Tell me, you know, tell me who loves you and what they would tell me about what gifts you have, you know? So I'm going to jump now, and I got sent back to the church in Indianapolis, and they were running the summer program the same way as when I had run it before, when I'd left. And it wasn't bad, but it wasn't really changing anything, right? Things weren't getting better as a result of what we're doing. So trying to think about this, think about how are we going to handle this? What are we, you know, what am I going to do? And I have a friend who talks about discernment by nausea. This is when you know something needs to change, but it's not going to be fun. Yes, David, I can absolutely send you know, that survey to you all.
Okay.
It's from
Perfect.
the back of it's from, so this is, it's actually one of the documents from the Asset-Based Community Development Institute. It was in the back of a little sheet called the history, or low-income neighborhoods and the people who reside there. And in the back was this 10-page survey that was designed to be used in the Lawndale neighborhood in Chicago while somebody was putting their clothes in the dryer. It was designed to be taken about as long as it would take for the cycle of the drying to go through. So this community organization used it. That's what we used because we were looking for something. I will say, in response to that question though, too, that across the years, we got rid of the 10-page survey because we just found out talking to people and asking people about their lives was the other got us into it. But across the years, we got rid of that survey and we just started asking people. So the people who love you, what would they tell us you do best? You know, and there were things like that we'd say. And almost always people would tell us, we found out people would tell us to better if we asked the question that way than if we said, what gifts do you have? Because for example, if you ask me what gifts I have, I might tell you I'm a good singer. No one who stands near to me in church would tell you that I'm a good singer. You know, so it's not because I'm lying, it's because I think I'm a good singer, right? So, but if we say to somebody, if you said to me, like, what do the people who love you say about you? I would not say, oh, the people who love me think I'm a great singer. Nobody would do that. So it's not anything else. It's just that type of thing. So when it come back, the summer program is going the same way. And our church was entirely built around the needs of people. How are we running programs for the needs of people? And so we began to look for something else. And, you know, how are we going to switch this? You know, in recovery movements, we say, you don't think your way into new ways of acting, you act your way into new ways of thinking. So how are we going to act our way into new ways of thinking? So we did that in some formal and informal ways. The formal way we did that is we hired one of the members of our church who lived in our neighborhood, who seemed to know everybody in our neighborhood, to go block to block and find out, take a block a week and find out all the gifts of people on that block. We also started changing the questions we asked. So a young woman came in to see me and she was 14 and she said she wanted a job and did I have a job for her? And I said, well, it was December. And I said, well, what do you notice? I'm thinking about this because of the video you played, David. You know, she said, well, I noticed that some people have Christmas decorations up and it really makes me happy when I see that. And I said, well, so why don't you make up a certificate thanking them for bringing joy to the neighborhood during this season? And you can take it to each house. And she said, well, I'll make a certificate, but you need to sign it. And I said, well, I'll only sign it if you sign it. And so her name is Keisha Maxison, and Keisha went and took notes thanking people for beautifying the neighborhood. Again, this is not the experience that people had from doing things a lot. And so it was beginning to change where across the years, we began with Diamond, whose job title we gave him, we called him the roving listener. And his job was to find the talents, gifts and talents of everybody on a block. And then he would just share those with us. And we would try to find ways to like bring people together who all cared about the same thing. If we found people who loved trains, we'd get people together. If we found artists, we'd get people together. If we found people who grew things, we got those people together. And we do that both inside our neighborhood and outside our neighborhood. So we were getting people together who were gardeners who were in our neighborhood, but we were also connecting them with people outside of the neighborhood, because in low income, low wealth neighborhoods, the problem is people aren't necessarily well connected outside of the neighborhood. So our goal was, how do we get people, build people's social networks? Well, we do that by, if there's somebody in the church who doesn't live in the neighborhood who also loves gardening, get them to go to the gardening conversation, right? Because that's how things happen. So that was what we ended up doing. I'm looking at the comment about situational and generational poverty. Yeah, one of the things I remember most about this conversation about situational and generational poverty is there's a community center in Indianapolis, and I was talking with the director, and she said, we're doing great with generational poverty. And I said, oh, how do you know? And she said, because we've been working with the same families for 3 and 4 generations. And I thought, well, I don't know that that's the way to think about that, but it
I think that's
changed.
the wrong measurement, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yes. Well, but this is what a service type of economy often tries to figure out. We changed the rules by which we lived. And one of the rules we changed was that money flows into the hands of our neighbors. So we had been running programs that we had been getting paid to run for our neighbors, whose problem was they were poor. They didn't have money. It wasn't that they weren't smart and creative and entrepreneurial and all those other things. It just meant they didn't have money. But we had been running things for a long time in a different way than that.
You
And
act,
so,
I,
go
I
ahead.
think you actually detailed in your book, I believe, an example of a organization that had a grant, or maybe it was the city that wanted to start a
Yeah,
program, and your proposal to them was, instead of to cut their budget by $1 million, I believe, and give $100,000 to 10 different families, and then check in 3 years later to see which effort had made the biggest difference.
right. They didn't buy it, but I still think it would be a good idea. And as I understand it from conversations we have with economists, this is what economists say, that direct give is the most effective thing. I think during the pandemic, one of the things we found out the government did was handed out a lot of money, and it was really helpful to people. So yeah, and one of the things about that in the neighborhood, I want to say, because there was a really unique thing that happened with the pandemic with us with that, is that when the pandemic started, what neighborhoods would often do is community centers would become places where cash or food or other things would get distributed in a crisis. And while that did happen, what changed was the main philanthropy in Indianapolis, an $800 million foundation called the Central Indiana Community Foundation, had started paying attention to what we were doing with paying attention to our neighbors. And they had in fact hired Diamond to work to help them to do this all around the city. So they'd been doing this for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, when the pandemic hit. And they went to Diamond and said, so you have people in all these different neighborhoods who know their neighbors and know the gifts of their neighbors. One of the things we need to do is distribute some money during this time. So can we give you, each of these people, $7,000 to hand out to their neighbors? So they did that. And then they had the Central Indiana Community Foundation had such a good experience with that. They ended up giving them more money. And over the past 1.5 years during this pandemic, they have handed out between $1.5 million and $2 million, neighbor to neighbor, this money going, not through an institution, but through neighbors taking care of each other. The other thing that Diamond and his neighbors had been doing for years, which is great, is they had been keeping track of how much money people loaned each other. People don't think of people in low-income neighborhoods as being philanthropists, but man, somebody can't pay a light bill. Before they're coming to see me at the church, they're going to their neighbors. and that's a lot more effective. So Diamond and his neighbors started tracking how much money changed hands between people in things like this. And there is an enormous amount of philanthropy, what you'd call in any other place, philanthropy going on. But because it's not part of an institution, because it's just neighbors, people don't notice. There's a group called the Family Independence Initiative. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they've recently rebranded. But if you Google FII.org, you get to their new thing. But they've created a database of what neighbors do for each other. So like, one of the things they keep track of is, did you give your neighbor a ride when they needed one? Did your neighbor watch your kids while you had to run to the store or on an errand for something? Did you take cookies to a neighbor who is sick, or take something to eat to a neighbor who is sick? And they are keeping track of these things that people actually do. And in low income communities, that's especially valuable, again, because people outside low income communities don't realize that all that is going on. that there is
Yeah,
great
that's it. That
generosity.
would be an interesting list to see. Do you think, do you know, has that increased since COVID, the neighbor interaction?
Yes, it has actually from what gatherings haven't, but
Right.
but people exchanging things has.
Interesting. Okay.
You should talk to Diamond sometime. He's great. But this
I think he,
FII.org, the founder of that is a guy named um, Mauricio Lim Miller, and he won the MacArthur Genius Grant for what he's done with this. And it's just really an interesting database and an interesting way to keep track of what people do for each other rather than what's missing in their lives. All of us have, every single one of us has problems, you know,
yes.
but we can't do much with the problems we each have, but we can do something with what we have and what
Yeah.
we can contribute to each other. And that's, anyway, that's how we think about that. That's how we look at that. I don't know. I think you put, David, you put in a quote from the book, but yes, I will send out the copy of the questions. Are there any questions or comments you all have at this point? I can go on, but I just pause for a moment
Open up your microphones and ask away, folks.
if you want to. Does this make sense to you?
I see some heads nodding, but let's hear from some folks too.
I'll chime in.
Hi.
Yes, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
This is O'Brien Daniels. I live in a Springfield community. I think it's absolutely the conversation that you have to have with someone that doesn't look like you and comes from complete different background to understand the different dynamics and whatnot. So it's been one challenge for myself personally, just being viewed as something else because people already have some kind of perception because I had to get food stamps at one point or because I had to go get church help or whatnot. I was already part of a stigma, some kind of already idea created just because I fell on hard times. And it's been quite a bit of a challenge just connecting with ones that kind of saw past that, the financial hardship part, and just connecting to the ones that are really trying to help build you and get you out of that situation, as opposed to keeping you in that situation and keeping you needing community resources and whatnot. I feel in my time, it's been, how do we get them up and lifted out so they don't have to come back? So when you say a family of 3 and 4 generations coming for the same services, we didn't break the cycle. We just perpetuated a struggle for that long. So it's having hard conversations with people that don't look like you. That's what has to change. Some different opinions, some different experiences, some different perspective. And I'm a millennial, so we get tagged as not being smart enough or lazy, or maybe even the lost generation. But it's more so for me, just mentorship and connecting with those that really listen to me, as opposed to just trying to tell me what I need to do, because we are in a different time. So things are different, down to the Zoom calls and us having to do these things like this to a network. Things are different now. So we have to have some hard conversations about what healing and growing and changing processes look like. This is it. This is absolutely fabulous. I just want to say that real quick. Thank you, Mr. David. I don't know how much you remember of me, but a few years ago, you were you were one of those. You made the difference in my journey. So you guys are doing awesome work. I just wanted to chime in.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And yes, I do remember you. And I remember you because you have a unique name. That's how I'm able to remember you, right? I do very much remember you. Thanks for that. Anybody else jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, please.
I was going to ask for other questions, but you may want to build off something she said. So,
well, one of the things to build off of what she said is, those 3 questions we asked, like, what 3 things do you do well enough you could teach somebody else how to do? What 3 things would you like to learn? I realized after a year that I had not followed up with any of that. I'd asked people, but I hadn't then followed up. kind of embarrassed about that. So we went back to them and said, if you say you're good enough at this, you can teach this. If you can get 3 people to show up for a class, you can hold it in our building and we'll provide the materials. So we had Mexican cooking class, we had basic auto repair, we had music class, we had painting class, we had Tai Chi, we had the history of the Hollywood Western and why Black men were left out. We had one class in conversational physics. I still remember talking to this guy about conversational physics, and he was, when he said this, I remember being startled, right? This is a guy who's living on the street. And he said to me, "You didn't think I was always a junkie, did you? I was getting my PhD in Notre Dame in physics when I got hooked." And it was like, oh,
Oh,
so we called this the School of the Spirit, and we put a coffee can in the room, and any money put in the can, the teacher got to keep. Well, after a while, those classes some of them got well enough attended that we said, well, we're going to do 6 weeks now, and you have to pay up front $42 for 6 weeks. So the new local newspaper did a story about it, and the church got a call. Somebody said, well, I'd like to take the class in conversational psychics. And we're like, well, no, it's conversational physics. And the person said, oh, then I'm not interested at all. And I wondered later, what's a class in conversational psychics like? It's really quiet because everybody knows what everybody else is thinking, you know. But this is at the heart of asset-based community development, is the gifts of the individual. So there's 3 keystones to the asset-based community development: the gifts of the individual, and that is that everybody, absolutely every single person has a gift, and it's a sin to waste it. The second thing is in what are called associations. There are official and unofficial associations. I imagine people in this room are part of both of those, right? So you might have a teachers association, a professional association of some sort, but there's also the people I get together and play cards with every Thursday night. There's the people I go fishing with. There's, so these type of associations. And in associations, people will do something because you're a part of it that they wouldn't otherwise do. Like if I go to somebody and say, hey, my church is doing this thing, but I'm in this group that does camping that has nothing to do with church. And I say, we're going to try and raise some money for a fundraiser. Could you support it? They'll support it because they know me, because we're part of this group together, even if they don't share the same love or thing. So associations are great in that they provide ways to connect us beyond our gifts, right? And then the third thing is institutions. And institutions do lots of things like buy things. Institutions spend money. Again, I'm a pastor of a church. A church is kind of an amalgam of institution and association. But if we're going to pay for food somewhere, why am I not hiring my neighbors to do that, to provide the food? Right? Why am I going outside of this that I'm doing? If there's art and that we're going to have in our place, why am I not paying attention to the artists around my community? So if you use those 3 things, the gifts of the individual, the gifts of associations, and the gifts of institutions, that's sort of those are the ABCs of ABCD. We had around our place what we call the 5 rules to keep from being the agent of the devil in the middle of the church. And these can apply anywhere, but we use them in the church because it's the way we think about it. But the first rule is never do something for someone that they can do for themselves. I once was talking about this with a group of people who struggle with mental illness. And it was this group in upstate New York. And I said this first rule, and they all cheered and they stomped and they clapped. And afterwards I said, I've never gotten this reaction before when I've told this, never do something for someone that they can't do themselves. And I said, why did you cheer so much? And they said, because nobody ever lets us do anything.
wow.
Everybody, helps us, but doesn't do stuff, doesn't allow us to give. I have a friend in Cincinnati who one of the things he likes to say is that old saw that we all know, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And he says, then why are we hoarding all the giving to ourselves? We should be sharing that, giving others the chance to give. He ran a food pantry at his place, and they did a survey of what the gifts of people in the room were, and 75% of the people who came were cooks.
Wow.
And he's like, what's going on here? we need to be expanding this. So they kept expanding it. And that's just really at the heart of this. So the first rule is never do something for someone they can do for themselves. The second is find another's gifts, talents, capacities, passions, and dreams, and find a place for them in the life of the community. So don't do what I did, which is ask people what they're good enough at to teach, and then wait for a year to come back to them. If you're going to ask people about their gifts, then be prepared to try and, find some way for them to share it. I always thought, especially with the people with food, it was good to test them, like if you're good at making cookies, I'll pay for, 24 cookies, bring them to me and I'll test them and see how they are. So there are ways you can test out what people's gifts
Yes.
are. The third rule, and this was around for our type of setting in low income, low wealth neighborhood is, if don't give poor people services, give poor people income, because what poor means is people don't have money. The fourth rule was if people are bent on providing services rather than income, see that it comes in a way that gives people choice or agency or power, however you want to say that. But agency and power is a really important thing. And the fifth thing we said was practice hospitality. And I remember a young man who was an intern at our place went and talked with some friends of his parents about this. And they were like, yeah, but Josh, but if I find somebody who loves to fish, what program do I connect them to? And Josh said, if I came and told you I love fishing, you wouldn't say, boy, do I have a great program for you. You'd say, where do you go? Where are your favorite spots? What do you do with what you catch? When you catch it, do you cook it? If you cook it, how come you haven't had me over for it? Let's go out together and let's do this. Hospitality is just sort of welcoming the neighbor, being, listening to people, paying attention to people.
That's excellent. So. Chet, I see Chet has a question here.
Thanks, David. Hey, Mike,
Yes.
I'm loving everything that you're sharing. I'm wondering, I think you highlighted your own experience in that you asked what these gifts are and talents, and but the next step for what do you do with that? And I'm curious if you're familiar with any processes, programs, tutorials, guide, direction to activate and facilitate the engagement of those of our neighbors' assets and gifts. It feels like a little bit of an overwhelming task to as I think about just on my own block. There's probably 100 residents. Like I could do that survey, but then what? And how do you I guess how could you expand that? I don't know. I'll leave it open.
So the process question I would say is what, we started out just making things up, like this school of the spirit, like going back and asking people, if they'd be willing to teach other people and if they could get other people to show up for a class. But on a thing like what you're talking about, I think what we moved towards was getting people together who all love photography, right? getting people together and then trusting that there was some magic that would happen in them getting together. When we got cooks together, they shared recipes. When we got, and we would ask our interns to go to these gatherings and they would say, what are we doing? And we said, you're paying attention. Said, what are we paying attention to? And you said, where the energy is. You'll be able to tell where the energy is among people. And then you find a way to like join yourself to that. We had some neighbors who wanted to start selling food they were growing. Well, okay. So we built off that. We didn't have an idea when we'd start out with them. It was just by listening to what they cared about and what they were doing that we build on that. And we said, we will support anything our neighbors want to do as long as it's not illegal or obscene, and we're a little flexible on the illegal. But I mean, we would just try things, but parties really became a place or gathering people together. And then after a few years of doing these parties, we got smarter about it. But one of the things is we started bringing together the food people and the music people. So and these were in people's living rooms. These weren't in big things. These were in people's homes, and we would just hang out and enjoy each other. Sometimes a poet would get up and recite a poem. It was different. There was a woman in our neighborhood who we noticed had been doing something, and we didn't know about this. Her name is January York, and she invited 12 of her neighbors who were men who had all struggled with depression. And she made a 7-course meal and she set it in front of them. And she said, I'll be back in 3 hours. Talk to each other. I mean, wow. And when they got talking to each other, they found out, oh, we've had similar experiences. How do you cope with this? How do you cope with that? And that was just those people doing that. But so we ended up inviting a lot of people from health institutions around the city to come together and be part of this conversation, because we're like, you should know what January's doing here, because she's actually helping the mental health of her neighbors by cooking food and leaving.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just think it's our imaginations that are always the big challenge. Is what do we want to try? And then the question is not, did it work or didn't it work, but what did we learn from it? Now, do we do something different, or do we do it a little different across the time?
I even struggle with asset-based community development sometimes with that, with reminding myself of that framework, because I have such great muscle memory at looking at the negative, or looking at the problems,
Well, you're at a university, you all specialize in that.
Yeah, yes, we do. But I noticed even last year, because I went to several throughout the Springfield area. We were doing these small mini grants to some neighborhoods, and so I went to several neighborhood homeowners associations actually, and it didn't matter where you went, the meetings all sounded the same. It was 98% negative about problems, and lo and behold, they were all talking about the same problems all the time. And
Yes.
so even in that, I was like, okay, wait, we need to be talking about assets. What are some things that are going well? What are some things we can build upon? We just have so much practice looking at the negative. It can be a real challenge to shift that mindset.
Well, one of the things we've done to try to shift that mindset is, because that's certainly an issue in churches and in communities as a whole, is we start out by asking a question that gets people talking about something positive at the beginning, like, tell us what brings you joy, as a check-in question, right? And people go around the room and they share what brings them joy. Well, now it's a little less likely that the first comment out of that will be a complaint. And then if you can't, but I mean, asking, the other thing we ended up doing within the church was we ended up putting all the stuff that people found like would suck up all the energy and time, we started putting it at the end of gatherings, so that if we put it at the beginning, we would suck up all the time and energy with, this. But if we put it at the end of the meeting, the energy was already waning. And then people would like spend less time on the miserable things. So agenda development is important sometimes.
That's excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent point.
And that's
And
true
some-
for neighbors, anything. Yeah.
And then, I think we probably all know this in theory, but sometimes you just have to try things, throw things at the wall and see what sticks, is how it's said sometimes. Just try different things. I've tried some of the approaches you mentioned with having people teach or do a gathering around their hobby or interest here in our neighborhood. And with men, especially, I've had a really hard time getting any takers. I mean, a guy that's restoring a car, I know I'll do all the food, come and you talk to us about your car restoration. Nope, don't want to do it. Another guy who fishes a lot, talk to us about, tying lures and stuff. Nope, not going to do it. And I'm like, wow. What? And then I saw a neighbor, they were playing ping pong in their garage, and stopped and visit with them for a while and just said, hey, what do you think about having a ping pong league or a ping pong tournament or something? It was, yeah, I'm in. Well, and we end up having a really good turnout for a ping pong tournament. That never would have been on my radar. So you have to observe, pay attention, and just try some different things. We have some failures along the way, but you'll have some successes too.
Well, I have signs on doors around here that say success is a series of repetitive failures.
Love that.
But yeah, go where the energy is. When that guy wants to do something with this ping pong thing, then it happens, right? That's how things happen. Things rarely happen through strategic plans. Rarely do you hear, well, the reason we did that is because 7 years ago in a strategic plan, that was item number 17. No, usually people will say, well, Gene and Renee got together and they did this thing. If you ask people how something started, where it started, where was the thing, that's what happened. And I just think that's the way communities actually work. Now, if I'm going to build a building, I need things to be more precise than that. But people aren't steel, and people work differently than building materials. So applying the same standards that we use to building a building, to building a community, doesn't work. I don't think, in my experience.
We still have about 10 minutes. How about a few other questions? I know a couple of you on here read the book because you've messaged me too. You want me to call you out? I mean, come on. I know you have some questions.
But I don't know. I thought.
Unmute yourself and ask away.
I have a question.
Sure, Stan.
Yes.
In your book, you talk about how you used youth to gather information. Could you tell us more about that program and also how it worked in terms of getting useful information, but also how you judge the impact on the lives of the youth and people in being involved in that?
So yeah. So I had started to talk about this a little bit ago when I went back to Broadway, and we were running the summer program the same way. We ended up deciding to do with the young people what Diamond had been doing, which was we hired young people and paid them to meet their neighbors. And they did 3 things. They named the gifts, talents, dreams, and passions they found in the lives of their neighbors. They publicly celebrated those gifts, and then they connected them with other people who cared about the same thing. We did that for a couple of reasons. Young people would get summer jobs, but they would almost always be outside of the neighborhood. And anything they had, where they went to school, they got bussed out of our neighborhood to another part of the city to go to school. And everything they were told about their neighborhood, their parents, their neighbors, was they're terrible. This is what people at the school would say to them. I mean, it was awful. And so we wanted them to find out that their neighbors, which they already knew in some ways, but we wanted them to have the practice of experiencing that these neighbors had actual, gifts and were interesting people. So the thing I would say that, because the School of Public Health at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis followed up with this in terms of the data type of stuff, because we're a church. We know how to count how many people show up to church on Sunday and how much the offering is, but we don't know how to do other kind of evaluation. So what they told us was that these young people were making more money years later, 10 years later, after they had started doing this, than other young people who they grew up around, that they were healthier and that the community was healthier as a result of what they had done. Yeah, things got better for them as a result of finding out that their neighbors were good people. Because what ended up happening, of course, is it just ended up building social networks was part of what that happened, which helps any of us.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, Stan, or not?
Yeah, you did. And you also led me to another one, and it's the negative thinking perhaps, but you can't get away from the fact that even with asset-based development, you're looking around and you're seeing something that you want to make better. And once you see that, or that somebody wants to make better, and that's and that gets into measurements. You talked about the youth earning more than in the past. And you said kind of your aha moment, there were 9 young people who were killed. And they said, that's not right. We've got to fix this. And how do you, and so many good things happen with a program like you're talking about, but you're still looking at that community and saying, we need to do something. And how do you stay, maybe another way of asking, do you keep in mind a vision of what that community that you're involved with, what you'd like to see it in 5 years, or do you erase that vision and let the community decide, or you not even worry about that?
Well, I think we wait and see what's growing up around us. We used to try and determine that, but it didn't do any good. But I think, because you read the book, one of the things, we talked to the School of Public Health about was mutual delight. Does the mutual delight increase in our community? Because people don't live on bread alone, we lives of meaning are around other things. So what we found out is when we stopped focusing on the problems got better. The number of people who were killed by violence went down. People were physically healthier. So there were, so our experience was when we focused on the good and what was present, that it met more needs than our focusing on the needs had done.
If I could, can I add one more point?
Sure.
In here, and I just want to piggyback off of what the gentleman just said. It's cognitive dissonance that you're going to have to. It's an internal battle that you're up against. Things you think things you were taught, tradition, parenthood, and all of that. These things have been passed down, and we found out that it's not true, or it was half true, or it was altogether misinformation. So you are battling what you thought or knew. And it's all a matter of, do you have the energy to relearn, or are you just comfortable being what it's been for however long you've been on the earth? I personally, I'm having to restart and just redo everything from childhood. A lot of people don't know that mental health is something that is very serious. If you take the ACEs adversity score, it tallies the traumas that you endured 1 to 10 years old or something like that. Most of us have had 3 to 4 traumatic or very traumatizing experiences, and it messed with development in our thinking and cognitive and just dealing with the world. So that's why most of us are out here acting crazy and don't know which end is up. But I personally have recognized it's just understanding. I thought I knew something. I thought I knew American history, but I really didn't. It's misinformation. It's dogma. It's you doing the research to unlearn and relearn so you can reconnect with the community. talking to someone like me, opposite of you, completely different background, is how we come together. I was part of the parent leadership institution that Community Partners hosted in 2019. There's about a total of 14 of us, completely different backgrounds. No one looked like each other. We even had some exchange students part of the program. Changed my life, changed my perspective. It's about coming together and having complete different background and coming together with one understanding that we are human and we are all struggling in something. So that's what I wanted to say.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I think when people end up talking with each other and hanging out, they find out that there's a lot more in common than there's not. I mean, mental illness knows no class boundaries or ethnic boundaries, right? I mean, all sorts of problems that end up getting labeled as problems where if people have money, they can hide those problems.
Well, I see you've answered the other question in chat, and we try to always promptly wrap up at 1 p.m. So don't want to overstay our welcome and your time. You've been very generous to spend time with us today, and we sure appreciate it. And
if anybody wants to talk about these things, I'm fine to have you contact me and do that. And David, I will send you the survey that the person asked me to send.
That'll be great. That'll be great. And like I said in the early introduction, I was glad to hear that you and David Runyon had connected and had a chance to visit. He spoke to this class early on, so he's a favorite. And if you haven't had a chance to read the book, Having Nothing, Possessing Everything, I would strongly encourage you to do so. And a reminder that our class in January, also on the third Thursday at noon, it's January 20th. Our guest will be Becky McCrae. She's a nationally known community development specialist, and she'll be presenting this idea, what she calls the idea-friendly method. It's something that you use to discover the best approach to projects in your neighborhood or your community. It'll be an interactive session. It'll be focused on taking action on your own ideas for your community. So come prepared. It'll be great. If you know Becky, she's engaging and excited to be able to have her in January. So this video will be posted and available only to those who have registered for the class. And so unless there's any other closing comments.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in today. Great to have you. Pastor Mike, thank you.
Bye-bye.